Welcome, everyone, to the first episode of a new series that I'm kicking off called People Who Ship, where you will hear from folks from our customers who are actually building and shipping AI applications into production using MongoDB. In today's episode, I'm very excited to welcome our first guest. And since this is the first episode, I thought it would be fun to open with a special guest, if you will. So we have one of our internal customers with us. We have John Ziegler, who is the tech lead for one of our for all of our internal generative AI applications and tooling. So welcome, John.
Thanks. Yeah, it's excited to be here, and we're not in charge of every AI tool, but we are.
Okay.
Thankfully I don't have to worry about having that massive scope. But we do a bunch of different things. So the things I would say that aren't in our scope are a lot of our like sales specific or go to market specific AI initiatives, as well as some of our like code generation and developer
Got it.
productivity use cases. There's just so much to do and so much scope there. Um, those
Right.
situations we actually have individual teams that are going out there and looking at those. Uh, there's a few, I'd say, other like pockets of AI innovation around the company. Folks looking at some really cool things in marketing, as well as in our education team. Some really cool AI initiatives all over the place.
Maybe I should bring more guests from MongoDB onto this channel then. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a full-time job maintaining any organization-wide or enterprise grade AI applications. So really excited to learn about and learn from you about the things you are building today. So why don't we start with a quick round of introduction where, yeah, introduce yourself in a few words and tell us a bit about what you do here at MongoDB.
Yeah. My name is John. I'm an engineering lead here on the internal AI tools team. So really, what we're focused on is building internal tools that utilize Gen AI to just make the overall organization more effective, make the company more efficient. And that really involves two primary tools. So the first is our central RAG platform, so our retrieval augmented generation platform, and the second is MongoGPT. So Central RAG is really about enabling teams to create these custom like RAG based chatbots, specifically on internal data. So like if they have an internal knowledge base or some content that they really want to create, like a RAG implementation on, that's what that platform is meant to help with. And then MongoGPT is more of like a general purpose chatbot just for company wide use. It kind of focuses on keeping things privacy and data sensitivity top of mind, as well as it includes a few different like specialized automations that are like Mongo specific or that tie into like our particular workflows. So those are the two main platforms. We have a bunch of other stuff on the agenda, on the roadmap. But those are the two main ones that are out in production and being utilized heavily today.
Awesome. Yeah, like I think these are very relevant because I've had several conversations with our customers, especially about building these centralized RAG systems. And I think that kind of goes into something like MongoGPT as well, where they're building custom or domain specific GPT like application chat like applications on top of custom data. So very relevant to uh, what some of our customers are building. So for today, I would like to dig more into Central RAG. I know both of them have their both MongoGPT and Central RAG. We could have their own episode on each of them. So maybe today let's focus on Central RAG. So tell us a bit about that feature. Like, what are the key features within Central RAG, and what problem were you broadly aiming to solve with it?
Yeah, so I think in terms of what we were really trying to solve with Central RAG, it was to enable builders across the organization.
Hmm.
Um, so what Central RAG allows people to do is to create these chatbots using a curated knowledge base. So you want to be able to just quickly set up a chatbot over top of that, and then also enable both technical and non-technical users to pursue this. I think the goal we were looking for was to enable users to set up these collections,
Mhm.
and then be able to get up and running quickly on that. But I think that kind of the challenge, or I would say the big kind of kicker here, is to make sure that it's permission aware. And so I think that
Right.
was the really big um, you know key problem or key feature for us, is to make sure that users are only accessing data that they're entitled to, and that we're like really trying to focus on preventing sensitive information from leaking through any of these like LLM answers.
Right. So to that point, right? Like, and like I said, I've seen a bunch of customers build these applications, and one common theme I see is that they're trying to build these applications from the ground up. Like they're using all custom tooling, like they're using MongoDB to store all their custom data sets. Is that what you did, or were there some other tools and frameworks that you used to build Central RAG? And do you have an opinion on uh, one or the other?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in terms of opinion on one or the other thing, the answer is always it
It
depends, right?
depends, yeah.
I feel like that's always the answer. It's always an exercise in trade-offs, and what you're looking for. So I think for Central RAG specifically, we partnered with a vendor, Creedle. They've been really great partners with us, and one of the reasons for that was really this permission awareness. We were really focused on that as a need,
Mhm.
um, and really keeping that data sensitivity top of mind. Um, so they're having that platform and having that base to work off of, has then helped us be able to kind of scale out and handle a bunch of different different individual groups across the organization's needs, while kind of always keeping that same core functionality in place. I think we have a kind of a big spectrum of needs across an organization at Mongo's size, and so we wanted to really focus on the being able to curate like the right knowledge base, and really have like the right underlying data sources for RAG to work effectively, and wanted to be able
Mhm.
to focus on that, and allow our users to focus on that, and not have to worry about the permissioning and all of these other challenges and complexities. So yeah, for us, we went with a vendor solution that does use MongoDB really heavily for certain parts of it, as well as Atlas Vector Search under the hood.
Yeah.
Um, but we were really looking at trying to have that permission awareness throughout the system.
Very cool. Well, I have two broad themes I want to dig into here. One is that permission and data access part, but also before that, so like, how does this work? Like you said that these applications can potentially, well, the apps that you build on top of Central RAG can have access to multiple different data sources. So is is it like direct access, or is it more like enable access to Google Drive pre-processed documents, put them into MongoDB, and then uh, like the app talks to MongoDB and uses vector search to do RAG, or like what does that look like?
It's we're going to be sensing a theme here. It depends.
Okay.
So for certain data sources, so we're hooked up to like Google Drive, Zendesk, our internal wiki, which is based on Confluence. So for some of those, our the vendor platform has connectors that are set up.
I see.
So basically connect to those. Again, you're respecting the permissions of the user. So if they were trying to curate a knowledge base, for instance, and a lot of the content was on Confluence, was in our wiki. Then they could basically go through and select the pages or whatever they would want to add. Same with something like Google Drive, where they could kind of add in documents. But one of the things we noticed really early on, was this: there's lots of of data that's out there that might be in other formats, right? Maybe it's
Right.
maybe it's like our company documentation, right? Like our external MongoDB docs.
Hmm.
It could be like, what if it's an internal tool and it has a ton of content in the tool that isn't necessarily tied to like a wiki or anything like that.
Right.
Um, so for those, what we'll actually do is we'll use Mongo. So we'll basically have some sort of of scheduled sync or some sort of syncing process that would take all that and pull it into Mongo documents, and then actually utilize Mongo within the Centralized platform. So that can be
Got
another
it.
another data source, similar to like a wiki or Google Drive, where kind of instead of looking at like a Google Doc,
Yeah.
it's a document in a collection or a series of documents.
Got it.
Um, and then when you do the vector search, you would pull from there. Um,
Yeah.
and that allows us to also like link to the if say the doc is um like a website or something like that, that allows us to actually like link to that. So when the vector search completes and we have kind of the sources that were utilized in the answer, we can link out to that content and make sure that users can go to that.
Okay. Yeah. That was the piece that I was missing. So thanks for elaborating on that. So let's talk about this like permission awareness, right? Like how does that work, or what features does Credo offer that uh, helps all the documents to be permission aware, I guess?
Yeah, and I think this is like a theme across a lot of our generative AI applications is trying to keep this data sensitivity, privacy, permission awareness throughout
Yeah.
anything that we're building.
Yeah.
And basically how it works is that we want the permissions of wherever the data source is, we want those permissions respected throughout the entire kind of life cycle or the whole user story.
Right.
So like you can kind of think of in one way, um this can manifest itself in like somebody uploading data sources to like a little to like a knowledge base, right?
Hmm.
You wouldn't want them to allow them to upload anything or to link anything that they weren't otherwise entitled to,
Right.
right? So
Yeah.
there's one check there, and I think that's kind of like, I would say, sort of the obvious check. But I think one of the other checks is then on during the actual use.
Right.
What happens if somebody asks a question? Do we make sure that even if a data source has been added to the knowledge base,
Right.
if we're utilizing that content in RAG, are we making sure that the user that is asking the question also has access to that content?
Ah, interesting. Okay.
So let's say for instance that there's a sensitive document for
Hmm.
whatever reason that has been added
Yeah.
to what we're going to do this RAG search over. We want to make sure that if somebody's asking a question,
Yeah.
we actually do a permission check on that whole on all the different available sources, and we say, okay, we're only going to do a search, or only going to utilize sources that the person has access to.
Got it.
That way, it's not a situation where the LLM is answering a question and building a response or building an answer
Right.
based on data that the person doesn't already have access to.
Yeah. And is the end user aware of this? Like, or do you run into situations where the LLM might not be able to produce a good answer just because the user doesn't have access to the right sources and the user is like thumbs down to the response?
I think like a lot of the use cases that we've jumped into, with this that kind of thing is covered when we're sort of validating or making sure that we're curating the knowledge bases and really making sure that whatever we're utilizing is the best example of that, and that we test with a bunch of different users, and that we're really clear about building for the right audience. But it could happen even with those extra steps, and I think that's why that permission awareness is so important, is just we want to make sure that we're not risking that data leakage.
Absolutely. And this is this topic comes up every once in a while, but I think it's really so important to highlight this because like at the enterprise level, at the prototype level, you don't really need to think about that. But when you're actually going from that prototype to production, like data sensitivity, privacy, that becomes like such a big consideration, like one of the main ones almost, I would say.
Yeah, it's definitely there's always this like for first initial prototype, but it's like going from that that sort of next step, uh,
Right.
it comes with all of these additional considerations. And then it almost can sometimes feel like it's there's all this momentum up at first, and you're building and building and building, and you're so excited about the prototype,
Yeah.
and it's I got to get this thing out, and it's like, oh my gosh,
Yeah, there's so
so
many
many
other.
considerations. Like, what are we gonna do?
Actually, since we are here, like, why don't you tell us a bit about like what that looked like in your case? Like, what were some of the big considerations when you actually shipped this feature?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of considerations and
Mm,
challenges when you're building generative AI applications. I think for us, one, keeping knowledge sources up to date and relevant. I think that was one of the reasons why we want to make sure that we were partnering um with a vendor platform and with other teams across the organization, where really they were helping curate these data sources, because the engineers on our team may not be the experts on a data set, or
right,
on a knowledge base, right?
right,
So they may not be able to say if something should be or should not be included, or keep things up to date.
right.
I think one of the other challenges is just the data sources themselves.
Hmm.
In enterprise, there's there's always some sort of quirks of internal systems of everyone's wiki, or Slack, or just environment might be a little bit different, or it has kind of its own nuances.
Right.
So building connectors, or keeping that that working well can be tricky.
Can you give me an example of that? I actually thought like some of these systems, especially within like the same organization, would be fairly standardized.
So, well, at least within Mongo, like a lot of our internal tool, or our tools, like Confluence or Jira, things like that, they're actually deployed on-prem.
Okay.
So they're not necessarily like the same as, say, like a public facing Jira or a public facing Confluence API.
Right.
Because we had they've been brought on site, and we've made changes to them, or we've implemented things a certain way, because of considerations
So the
with
data source, like yeah, the data source, it's some data sources themselves are local.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
got it. Okay,
So that might be different than, say, what's available on the in terms of, say, like a public facing Jira or something like that.
right.
So if you're building a connector for those, what's available out in the open source community may or may not be super helpful. So you may have to kind of build in extra, thinking about like toolkits, right? For
Mm,
the agentic frameworks that are out there,
right.
like LangChain, right?
Yeah,
Uh, they have like a Jira toolkit, but the format of that Jira may not be the same as the format of the API that you're using within your enterprise.
yeah, 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 yeah.
It's like, kind of, in those situations now, you want to reuse and leverage the work of the community, but also you may have to do your own implementations. Yeah, big considerations and challenges. I think
Yeah, yeah,
another one that we've touched upon a bunch already, but just keeping data privacy and data considerations top of mind.
yeah.
Uh, and I think really that's been at the heart of all of our decisions, and I think there's trade-offs that have come with that. Thinking about like MongoGPT, doesn't retain state, right? It doesn't keep track of of someone's like chat history. That was intentional, because we were trying to make sure that if anybody was using the tool for any sort of sensitive use case, then it wasn't something that was retained.
Is that like an opt-in feature? And I do want to touch on like the user experience in a little bit because that's an important one for generative AI applications that you don't hear as much about right now. But yeah, is that like an opt-in feature or how does that work?
So at least with MongoDB, that's actually the default. So
I
it's one of
see.
these where we do allow folks to explicitly save a prompt. So if there's something that they found that has been really helpful, they can save that prompt. But in terms of what the content of a chat and things like that, that's actually that's not saved.
by
So that way,
default.
that way, that way there's no like risk of basically someone looking at something that they shouldn't.
I see. But then, like, how do you maintain like multi-turn conversations, right? Maintain that context.
So we'll retain the chat history
I
for
see.
the session, right?
Okay,
So
okay, okay.
was chatting like that is retained.
Got it.
Um, but if they were to close it out or something like that, then it would remove that the chat history there.
Got it. There was another thing before I forget I wanted to touch on was you mentioned that one of the big considerations was like data freshness and keeping that the data, making sure that the data sources were up to date. Can you talk about like how you do that?
Yeah, so in certain parts of the Cradle platform is there's like a crawling process. So these data sources are basically crawled really regularly. So that way we would basically like look at the content, see if anything has changed, and then re-embed if needed. For a lot of the situations where we have things saved in Mongo and we're
Mhm.
utilizing Mongo collections, again we'll synchronize these things regularly. So that way we're basically running on some sort of regular cadence.
Got it. And is this orchestrated via Creedle, or do you have like some custom cron jobs, what have you?
That one's custom.
Okay,
Custom cron jobs running behind the scenes that basically pull data out of the source system and put it into the Mongo collection. In terms of the cron work, we have this one internal tool that it's an internal data catalog, and so a lot of the metadata there is not something that would have a really clear like public facing API or something like that that we could reference. So what we're doing is pulling the content out of there, putting it into a Mongo collection, into a document collection, and that just runs basically on a cron cadence. So as we're doing that, we're loading it into the Mongo collection, and that Mongo collection is then utilized in the vector search. So it kind of gives us a way of incorporating data sets and keeping it up to date. When there isn't necessarily like a clear common data
right,
connector or a common tooling that's out there for us to
right.
work.
Nice. So you're basically using Mongo for any like custom things and then traditional or like the more broadly available APIs for things that are more straightforward. Very cool. Love that. I want to switch gears a little bit to talk about like the end user experience with Central RAG, right? So can you walk us through the steps of what a team looking to build a RAG application on RAG, what would that series of steps look like?
Yes, I mean, I think the first like fundamental is just the things that they need to know: like acceptable use, legal policies, what use cases make sense for generative AI, and what types of things like should be avoided. So I think that's kind of our first step.
Yeah.
So we have some internal trainings. We have internal acceptable use. So I think once that's been kind of level set, and we can grant access to the tool, and then you can basically come to the app. They set up a document collection, so that's basically like the knowledge base that's going to be specific for their high level goal,
Mm,
and then they can create this like the high level bot called Copilot, and the Copilot can have like a specific prompt,
mm,
specialized instructions, and then utilize that curated document collection as a knowledge base.
got it.
So they can basically start there, and then you can kind of like chat and validate the responses in the tool in the UI, and then once you're happy with it, um, there's a few different mechanisms for kind of surfacing that,
Yeah.
but I think it kind of surfacing like the chat experience,
Uh,
and I think that's kind of another example of a it depends type
yeah.
of it's going to be it really depends on what the user is trying to do. Does it belong in Slack?
Yeah.
uh, is it something that should be just hosted within the tool, or does it belong elsewhere?
It's probably left to the user to decide how it should
I
be
mean,
deployed.
I would say it's ultimately it's a partnership, right? Like we're here to help
Yeah.
and so it's kind of figure out what works best,
Yeah.
considering their use case and what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. Actually, to that point, can you talk a bit about like those different deployment mechanisms that you offer?
Yeah, so I think creating a Slack bot is probably one of the more common ones. That's where everyone does so much of their inter and intra team communication.
Right.
Uh, so I think that's a really common one for like internal like support asks, right? Like if you have a channel where your team fields a lot of questions, from other teams, things like that, then the Slack bot approach there could be really helpful as to kind of have the bot act as like a um, an initial answer. And then if the question requires some extra follow up or some more technical know how or whatever,
Right.
you have the team there to basically back up the answers.
Hmm.
Uh, so I think that that's one area. Another channel that we'll do sometimes is if the document collection or like the knowledge source is really general and
Hmm.
something that the entire organization could benefit from, and so it's it checks a lot of the uh you know the boxes across a bunch of teams, but also like isn't this like there's not like a sensitivity concern
Right.
like that. We could actually add it as a RAG data source in MongoGPT. So it doesn't just have to be isolated to one experience. We could kind of
Hmm.
incorporate these RAG features via API into other tools.
Right.
Uh, so that way you kind of have can reuse a lot of the same the same work that's been leveraged in central RAG and in other places and by other teams.
Right.
Uh, so like a great example of that is like some of the, like the public facing MongoDB documentation,
Right.
right? It's really general. There's probably tons of questions about it, right?
Yeah.
And there was already a really well curated, uh, you know,
Makes
data set
sense.
there. So we utilize that actually in MongoGPT, so that people can go in and ask questions.
Makes sense. Awesome. And are there any like user feedback mechanisms in place?
There are. So within the within Central RAG itself,
Mm.
there is like an evaluation section. And then like for instance with like the Slack bots, there's like a thumbs up, thumbs down reaction that folks can do. So they can say like, this was great, this was not so good.
Yeah. So is it at the response level or at the reference level?
It's it's basically at the
The
response from
final
the
response. Got it.
yeah from the bot. So when somebody asks a question on Slack, the bot will respond in the thread,
Right.
and then they kind of thumbs up or thumbs down it there, and include like a little blurb about why it was
Why?
good or bad.
Yeah. And like what happens with that response, like downstream?
Yeah, so depending on how the person has set up their bot, it can then be utilized in the prompt. So it can be used like to like make future iterations better. We can also just look at it for it will actually in Central RAG you'll see all the negative feedback, for instance, and you kind of just like go through that and say like, okay, are there like you know trends emerging, or kind of look through that and say like, okay, the bot is really struggling with this particular area or this particular context. Let's
Hmm.
go back and either clean up the document collection or maybe add more sources or things like that. You can change uh the underlying data set you're searching over to make sure you have the relevant information for each. Yeah, and well, and obviously, we're again, we're happy to help. So, it's one of these
Yeah.
things where we can partner on it and
Yeah.
help them, with whatever's you know needs to be cleaned up or needs to be changed. And I think again, it depends a lot on the user and like how sophisticated or how technical
Mm.
um is. Some teams are, especially like we're talking about like engineering as a downstream stakeholder.
Yeah.
uh they're gonna be able to build in a lot of things, versus say somebody that say from another department that doesn't necessarily have engineers allocated to their team.
Yeah.
Then in those situations we probably need to be a little bit more hands on.
Makes sense. I think a nice segue into from this is like, yeah, can you talk a little bit about like what evaluation and testing procedures you have for yeah, your data sources or central RAG itself? Because I think there's like two layers of like evaluation here, right? One is like at the central RAG level, you need to make sure that the data sources that you've curated kind of are applicable to a wide variety of use cases. Then there's like evaluation at the bot level. So can you talk a little bit about central RAG and any tips you have for evaluating at a per application level?
Yeah, and I think for us, I think it goes back to you always want to anchor on your use cases.
Hmm.
Like what is the problem you're trying to solve? And I think
Right,
you want to take that and say, okay, based on those use cases or based on my problem, say like what are my sort of like key metrics or key evaluation baselines that I want to work off of.
right,
And I think then from there you can kind of say, okay, what are we going to be testing or what are we going to be evaluating in our application. We have let's say a bunch of different things that we look for. I think the big focuses are always on the permission portion. So I like the platform level.
yeah,
It's where we're spending the most amount of time validating that say you're validating that if a user adds something to a doc collection that has lockdown permissions, is
right,
that utilized in responses, things like that, and in testing those with each data source
yeah,
is a big one. Like if we remove something for some reason, how quickly is that reflected in the answers, right? If you
right,
say it's pulls a document out of a collection for some reason, we want to make sure that there's it's not continuously reused, or something like a Slack retention policy, right? If the bot is utilizing Slack as one of its data sources and crawling Slack threads, we want to make sure that once a Slack thread is removed from our Slack history, and once it's past its retention policy,
right.
that thread isn't referenced
Ah,
anymore. Um,
interesting.
so
Okay.
so things like that we have to be be careful about. So I think that's one of the things that we're looking at.
Mhm.
Um, I think the other angle to that, and I'd say this is, I would say this, isn't something that's central RAG specific. I think this is just any your generative AI application is
Mhm.
kind of answer quality.
Yeah.
And so like one of the things that we've done really recently, it sounds pretty basic, but I think has been helpful, is just having a set of like question answer pairs,
Yep.
throwing those into Mongo.
Yep.
Um, so we have just a collection of a bunch of different documents with these question and answer pairs,
Right.
um, and then just periodically running through all of these questions and answer pairs and just validating like, hey,
Yeah.
is what's coming out consistent. So that way we can monitor it. And if we're running that
Mhm.
um, really regularly, or even part of your CI as on each change, just
Yeah.
making sure that whatever is coming out of your system makes sense. This is um, getting into some of our like next builds are, but we're looking at sort of this kind of like idea of a conversational analytics use case, where people can ask questions about data sets. Um,
Okay.
and something like that, you really want to make sure that whatever is being returned is correct, right? If somebody's
Right.
asking aggregation
Yeah.
or something like that, you don't want to give them a number that's wrong.
Right.
Um, and so, in those situations, what we've started looking at is like just having a set of just a really large list of just curated questions, a concrete answer,
Yeah.
and making sure that whatever's being returned by calls to the LLM, has the right answer.
Yeah. And are you using to do the actual evaluation whether the generated answer tracks with the original answer? Are you using like LLM as a judge or is it more manual?
Both.
Okay.
So it's one of these things where I think for certain things you can use LLM as a judge.
Yeah.
But even like if it's a particular number that you're
Right.
looking for, you can even just do
Yeah. And then I always think about LLM as a judge, right? Like it's if you're using the same LLM as a judge that you use for generation, then it's kind of like introducing the same biases into the evaluation process as well. So
Yeah, I think it's it's one of these things where if the evaluator is not perfect,
yeah,
then
evaluate the evaluator.
exactly how deep are you going to go?
Yeah, exactly. Can you tell us like the top three challenges that you faced when taking Central RAG or even MongoGPT from like prototype to production, and what challenges folks can expect in general when deploying AI apps to production?
I think this is the top three. I think is gonna be tough. I think I'll think about
Yeah,
just like
in general. Yeah,
the top overall. I think going from like early to production
yeah,
is just like what's possible, and thinking about how do we anchor to some early prototypes that show value, and kind of have this like iterative approach where we can do something that may be small or may not cover uh all of the use cases, but at least we can start to like show some progress, and we can start to like really solicit some user feedback and really understand
right.
the problem space. I think with generative AI in particular, like the line of something that is like, oh, this is super doable, to like it's like in super super hard, isn't always clear,
Yeah,
right? And so I think it's such an exciting and interesting space.
100%.
It's almost like there's just the field of open problems, or like the problem space just seems like so big, right? There's
Yes.
just so
Yep.
many things you could do. um it's like, how do you kind of like take such a really large abstract problem like that, and break it down into something that is something that we can work on
Yeah.
for at the individual level, and make progress. I think that's the been one of the biggest challenges for me,
Yeah.
is in this wide open world with all of these things happening and so much change just constantly happening.
Yeah.
uh how can you quickly identify opportunities, and start
Yeah.
building towards.
Like speed over perfection. That seems to be the theme of the kind of, yeah, the way generative AI is working right now.
Definitely, yeah, and it's I think that's part of what makes it fun, right? Like, it's
Very true.
uh yeah, a lot of stuff going on, but it's definitely not boring.
Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to add, or
I think
yes,
that's the main
the
like
main one?
kind of recurring challenge.
Yeah.
I think that then manifests itself in a bunch of other smaller challenges,
Yeah.
but I think
Uh,
kind of all is
there
to
was
making
There's
progress.
something you touched on a while ago, where when I was asking you about like the journey of what it takes to build something on Central RAG, and you had this like education piece, which I thought was very interesting. Like
Mhm.
just like starting with educating people about like what to expect and like what's possible. I think that was a really refreshing one for me to hear, because we don't hear people talking about that a lot. Like in a lot of these systems, we just assume that the users are just going to know how to use these systems. So like that was a really interesting one for me. So thanks for that.
It's tough, right? Because you start to see examples of things being built, and you're like, oh, let me try to build something just like that.
Yeah.
But if you don't know like the underlying kind of components, or what data is available,
Yeah.
or like the context of what that build was, how that build was designed, it may not be the best fit for your use case.
100%. Yeah. That was spot on. Uh, cool. So, yeah, tell us a bit about what's next for Central RAG, or just for your team in general, and then maybe we can look at a demo.
Yeah. So a lot of interesting stuff in the pipeline. I would
Yeah.
say I mentioned one of them in conversation analytics. I think so much of what we're talking about with generative AI involves large unstructured text, but what happens when it's like, go get me like a data point from one of my internal systems. I think that becomes kind of a tricky problem,
Yeah.
but one that is, to me, starting to kind of merge all of these disparate data sources together is a really interesting situation where people can kind of chat and get access to large unstructured text, but also individual data points, or aggregations, or things like sales numbers, for instance, or
Right.
like metrics on like like on specific items they're working on.
Right.
Um, so I think that's a really interesting one. The other one that I'm really excited about is we've been working on this like idea of like a batch or like a bulk LLM analyzer.
Mm-hmm.
So enabling people to have these like say you have 500 1,000 records of or documents of some so like unstructured nature. You're trying to like generate insight from all of those. How do you apply a series of prompts across like all of these different documents and aggregate all the results in a way that's um,
Interesting.
really really robust and interesting there. So that's a problem I think is really really cool, and one that I'm really excited about. I think then the last, I mean, everyone is that the hot word is like agentic,
Yep.
uh, agentic experiences, and just thinking about how not just about how like that paradigm could help us in central RAG, but like more holistically, like how do we go past a simple chat interaction to really just kind of surprise and delight people.
Awesome. I surprise and delight. I love that we are ending on that note. I think that's really the crux of generative AI. Like as engineers, there's surprise and delight in that, but also as a user, there's that element on that front as well. Awesome. All right.
I yeah, I heard another engineer team is called you're trying to make things like stunningly easy. I like that one too.
Stunningly
Uh,
easy. Yep.
stunningly easy.
I
Pretty
love
cool.
that. Awesome. Well, this was a great conversation. I didn't even realize how 45 minutes just went by. So thank you so much for sharing your insights and wisdom with me and all our customers, users, really anyone watching this. Um, yeah, I know you had a demo to share, so I want to make sure that we have a few minutes left for us to see that as well. So,
Yeah, I
to
can I
you.
can I can I can run us through that real quick.
Let's do it.
Um, but yeah, let me go over here. And so what we have here, this is Central RAG as a platform, and kind of talking through one of the examples
Hmm.
of one of our collections. So like this is all the information from like our public facing docs, our dev center, MongoDB University, all the transcripts.
Hmm.
So all kinds of interesting content here.
Hmm.
Uh, this was curated by our education team, so this is really interesting and helpful docs. They were actually looking at this just for their own use, and so you can kind of like link through and see like this is the docs that are public facing about Atlas streams. But it's all available here as a Mongo collection. And so we have, the API, if we want to set it up, as well as, being able to test and monitor on it. So like if we wanted to like test a search, we could right through here. But what I think is been really interesting about this is because it's a data set that is going to have, like wide applicability.
Yeah,
You have this API access. It's actually available like in MongoGPT. So
got
if you
it.
shoot over to MongoGPT, like that's what this like idea of a knowledge graph is, right? So if I go in
Got
here
it.
and I basically want to search, on that knowledge base, we can like reuse that same curated data set inside of Central RAG
Right,
inside of a more general chatbot here.
right,
So now we can basically utilize some of the the content that people have curated for their RAG use cases.
right.
Uh, across the org.
I also like this concept of knowledge packs. Like I haven't seen that yet, but
Yeah, and I
I
think it's
like
a
that. Makes a ton of
helpful
sense.
yeah, it's a helpful way to kind of explain RAG to a wide community.
Yeah,
Yeah, our design team came up with that, and I really 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 like uh
yeah,
that description of like what I of electing to utilize RAG
yeah.
is.
And also, like, I think, like, if you were to add, like, more data sources, like, there's usually, especially as your number of data sources gets large, I'm sure there's, like, some logical grouping for each of those, which could, like, become packs on their own. So, yeah, I like that.
Exactly, and so that's I think one really interesting use case is if we have these things that are like really widely applicable,
Hmm.
we can incorporate them and have the entry point be MongoGPT. Another example over here would be something like a Slack bot.
Hmm.
Like here's one for our developer productivity team. So this is actually, you can see here, users asking a question, wanted to check to confirm, and they got their answer. So this is a bot here answering questions. And what's really interesting here is these are pretty technical questions.
Yeah.
Utilizing some Slack threads, using documentation that's inside of our internal inside of Mongo is just documents. Some that's using Wiki.
Yeah.
But we have this bot basically here answering questions, specifically about our developer productivity tools and some of our like build tools and things
Yeah.
like that.
I
So
like the reference sources too. Like, is that like a default feature?
yeah, so
Okay.
the sources are referenced there, and then we also have the feedback that I mentioned before of thumbs up,
Perfect.
thumbs downing our answers.
Awesome. I really
Yeah.
like it. Yeah, I think like this demo just solidified a lot of the stuff that we were talking about. Like, and yeah, even here, the just these like cool little tidbits, those reference sources and knowledge packs. I think, yeah, I think just overall, this has been such an amazing conversation. Like every little thing you said, I think is so applicable to the kind of things that we are seeing folks build. So thank you so much for being here. And
Thanks for having
yeah,
me, and yeah, it was fun.
yeah,
Always happy to chat. Anything and everything generative AI. So we're just tech and
awesome.
jug. Love it.
Making things stunningly easy. I'm gonna I'm gonna be using that.
Yeah, you could that predates my time here. That's you have to thank the AI tools for team for coming up with that one. I really like it though. So
Yeah,
I've
awesome.
tried to adopt it.
All right. Thank
Cool.
you.
Yeah.
Got it.